Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. It's been a couple of weeks now, so a lot of things been going on. We got a lot of things to talk about. Already glad to see Al and Paul online here. So always glad to have you guys here with me today. Hope you're having a good day and that things are going well for you. There has been so much going on, and I've got a lot to burn through. And let me tell you, it's been crazy. But before I do that, just to kind of give you an idea of why it's been so long, I have had a lot of overtime going in. Hi, Luciano. Glad to see you as well. Um, with a lot of overtime going in means that I've been running around an awful lot and not had a whole lot of time with everything being topsy-turvy to be able to actually sit down and compile things. Now I've kind of had a bunch of things coming, that I've been paying attention to, and I've kind of distilled a lot of that down to just what we have here today. So let's go ahead and get started on what's going on in Ukraine, around Ukraine, and throughout the world, just kind of related to the situation in Ukraine. We'll start off with J.P. Lindsley. Now, Lindsley here is a journalist, worked at Fox News for a while, and parted ways with Fox News at right around the time the pandemic hit, and he was stuck in Ukraine. So he's been there reporting from the effectively the from Ukraine for the last 3 years of the war. He's been very much an interesting voice in the times I've had a chance to see some of his information. And I thought that we'd start off by reading his posts to Twitter/X here, which will take just a minute or two here. So let's go through it. From J.P. Lindsley. If I'd never been to Ukraine, I'd probably oppose it. From afar, to those quite tired of Washington's games, Ukraine might look like another endless U.S. war, pushed by media spin, the defense industry, and Hunter Biden's Burisma connections. Even Hollywood seemed in on it until they got bored. And I'd think the 2014 Maidan Revolution was staged by some State Department lady handing out cookies. But up close, the truth isn't what you'd expect. On Trump's inauguration day 2025, I made a deliberate choice not to join gatherings in Washington, but to take a train to Kharkiv, 30 miles from Russia. It felt worlds away from Inauguration Day 2009 when a call from Rupert Murdoch's consigliere sent me to the manufactured, manipulative world of media power. Now I'm in the actual, factual world where freedom is fought for daily. Back in 2009, while watching Obama's speech, I was summoned to New York to meet Roger Ailes, the creator of Fox News and kingmaker of presidents. "You're going to run this place," he told me. I had access to the corridors of power, the resources to investigate anything, to uncover truth. But truth wasn't welcome. So 2 years later, I fled. Much has happened since. In 2020, I found myself stuck in Ukraine during the pandemic. What was supposed to be a short stay turned into something much bigger. I discovered a fiercely free, safe, innovative, pleasant country where, thanks to natural food, my health flourished despite the pandemic. It was a free time. Ukrainians could not be locked away. And so, when Russia invaded, I knew I had to return to journalism. For 3 years, I reported live from Ukraine on Chicago's WGN radio, 10 minutes every weekday. Through missile strikes, power outages, and sleepless nights, I always found a way to share what I was seeing and hearing. Listeners wrote in saying they could hear the war in my voice. Hope, fear, exhaustion. It brought them to the war with a rigorous empathy every damn day. The Chicago Sun-Times called my reports something rare in the world of corporate media, real, regular humanity. And somehow, despite pro-Russian hate campaigns, those daily broadcasts continued for 3 years without interference from corporate overlords. Until they pulled the plug just before last Christmas. Gone in an instant, just as things were getting super interesting. The timing was strange. My report was canceled just as Ukraine's fight for freedom reached a critical moment, and right before Trump's inauguration. The station knew I had sources in Washington that could have shed light on what was really happening with Ukraine, but instead, silence. It made me reflect on why I left Fox News in the first place. I left Fox News not just to escape the control of the media manipulators. I wanted to understand the world, not from inside towers of paranoia and power, but by living in it. That's why I'm here now in Kharkiv, a city of resilient people who face missiles daily, even now at this very moment, yet refuse to surrender their freedom. Many Americans are skeptical of Ukraine, and I get it. You think this is just another endless U.S. war, but the war machine actually opposes a quick Ukrainian victory because long wars sell weapons. 2023 was a record year for U.S. defense sales. You think Biden's support is about Hunter's Burisma money, but Burisma isn't Ukrainian. It's part of a pro-Kremlin cartel working to undermine Ukraine's independence. You think the 2014 revolution was staged by the U.S., but I've met Ukrainians who were there. Victoria Nuland handed out cookies, yes, but she urged them to cut a deal with a pro-Putin regime. The truth flips these narratives on their head. That's why I'm still here, 30 miles from Russia, without my daily radio outlet, but still committed to bringing you the truth, raw, real, and unfiltered. Kharkiv is the center of the fight for freedom. The people here face missiles and drones daily, yet insist on living free. The resilient people of Kharkiv, so often bombed and so close to Russia, prove that Ukraine can win. And America can too, if we learn from their fight. Join the journey. From journalist J.P. Lindsley. And I want to just go ahead and post this over here, the link. So if you want to jump on and follow Mr. Lindsley on Twitter or X, whatever we want to call it this week, there it is. I thought the most important piece was the one where he says many Americans are skeptical of Ukraine. I have had people declare. I've listened to some of the audio tapes of Newland talking about the situation. Hang on a second. Sorry about that. I've listened to those audio tapes. So what I heard was somebody who was confused about who they could best support. And some of those indicate that they were trying to push them to support a pro-Russian regime over there, a pro-Putin regime. And yet the Ukrainians said no. They wanted their freedom. So this is the part I think is the most important piece out of this whole thing. But understand, Mr. Lindsley lays it out, where he comes from, how he ended up there, and his thoughts on these narratives. I thought it was very excellent. Hi, Robbie. Glad to have you on board. I bet you do, actually. That was where you have relatives at, as I recall. So let's go ahead and move on to what I'm kind of dubbing at this point in time the Trump effect. President Zelensky stated the quick end to the war in Ukraine will not happen, but the U.S. President, Donald Trump, could speed up the process through sanctions and economic pressure. And I thought that was an interesting kind of, not so much a change of message, but an emphasis that wasn't there before. During the first week of Trump's being in office, Russia launched 1,250 bombs and 750 drones at Ukraine. Now, this is a little bit, this is about average for what's going on over there from everything I've seen so far. This is where it was originally thought that Russia would literally just decimate Ukraine during this first week to kind of show Donald Trump that they had the upper hand. But instead, it was Ukraine doing a lot of the education on who has the upper hand. From Lindsley again, is Trump unleashing Ukraine to punch back? After enduring months of nightly Russian attacks with Iranian drones on homes and infrastructure, Ukraine last night, now this is from the 24th, so just a couple days ago, flipped the script, sending more than 100 drones deep into Russia. And now it seems at last they have Washington's blessings. They hit the Rosneft oil refinery, Norazan. They've hit it again, I might add. That's 470, actually, the others say 480 kilometers from the front. Russia's second largest microelectronics manufacturer in Bryansk was also hit. And Int'l's air base, the main hub for bombing of Ukrainian cities, was also hit as well. And he talks about this, about what could be happening differently. And we've seen a lot of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump regarding this, and some of it's questionable. Some of it's pretty interesting, a lot more powerful than some might have expected. But let's keep on going here. One of the things I am attributing to the Trump effect is this statement from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, saying that Europe is ready to finance the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine. They're finally coming around to, we've got to get serious about this. Europe cannot rely on America to do this with purely out of the goodness of their hearts. So business will buy the weapons. We'll give them to Ukraine. By the way, just going to pop back to this for a moment. One of the recent statements that I saw that I don't have tonight is that the bombs and rockets and missiles and equipment that Israel had purchased was finally being sent, despite being held back by the Biden administration. And Trump's statement, as I recall, was, "They bought it. We're going to send it." So there you go. That might be something that they're seeing over there in NATO. That type of a response of, that's already bought, we better send the goods. President Zelensky did, however, moderate some of his commentary, saying, in the Trump's world, Europe needs to learn to take care of itself. We must unite defense and security, production, and strategy. Also, Europe cannot expect to continue to buy gas from Russia and then have the U.S. provide free security. And this is straightforward here. If Europe is busily, basically paying for the invasion of Ukraine by buying Russian gas, then why should the U.S. provide anything free or even at low cost to fight in Ukraine? Because Europeans are still paying for the war to go on by buying Russian gas. So it's an interesting statement. They should be buying gas from the U.S. if they want U.S. support, for instance. Now, I mentioned earlier that the weapons that Israel was getting its weapons delivered from the now Trump administration. Well, there's now been a series of cargo flights. C-17 transports flying from Ramstein Air Base in Germany to Nevatim Air Base in Israel, then flying directly to Sheshuf International Airport, the gateway for Western aid headed to Ukraine. What are they loading up in those C-17s? And there have been several of these aircraft already flying, multiples, not just the one or three it mentions in here, but several others as well. And the currently running theory, so I don't have this confirmed, the currently running theory is that this is captured Russian weapons and equipment that Israel captured during their fight with Hezbollah and with Hamas. Hey, you know what? I'm just going to point out this one little tidbit there, and that is that Israel also retired a Patriot air defense system. So, and I think there's quite a few launchers associated with that. So, maybe that's could be as well. I don't know for sure. I just know that these aircraft have been flying from Germany to Israel, then to Poland, in a pattern that suggests they're bringing equipment and supplies with them. Russia's propagandists have absolutely been going ballistic over Donald Trump's rhetoric. I don't have the message he sent, but it was pretty much saying, look, I don't have a beef with the Russian people, but you know what? We got to get this taken care of. Knock it off, Russia, which is a really rough summation. And they are saying that they are tired of these insults that Trump has been sending their way. They have, as opposed to before, where they were trying to mock Donald Trump, they're starting to say, okay, we can't do that and try and get anything our way. The Russian Telegram channels are saying that there are surprises from Trump for the Kremlin that may have a big impact on Russia. He's calling for OPEC to drop the price of oil, as currently in the 60-ish range, as I recall. If it drops to about 45, there's no way. The 44 is the break-even point for Russia. At 45, they can't even do anything with any extra money. They're literally just paying for what they're pulling out of the ground and shipping off. Putin responded with this 8-minute long speech that just lavished praise on Donald Trump. This is quite the change of tone here. He was saying he's intelligent and pragmatic, and that you won't impose sanctions on Russia because this would harm the American economy. I want you to think about that for a moment. What exactly does Russia provide that the American economy needs? There are a couple of things, but not a whole lot. Again, more of the propagandists who are getting ticked off at Trump. They're really going after him now, saying that he's an old orange clown, and saying that there's just no way that they're going to do that. Putin's going to do the things that Trump wants of him. Kurt Volker, who served as the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine during Trump's first year, stated, though, that he predicted that Trump would call on Putin to cease military actions and then significantly increase pressure on Moscow if the Russian leader does not comply with this demand. And this is what seems to be playing out at this point in time. I would love to read this whole piece from Roman Sharameta on the price of weakness, but suffice to say that basically the only thing that truly provokes Putin is being weak. Meaning that if we are weak in our response to him, he considers himself provoked and given permission to move forward with his actions. In the same vein of this Trump effect that I'm talking about here, you may have caught in the news that I think it was earlier today or late yesterday that 2 airplanes full of Colombian illegal immigrants were turned away from Colombia. And the president of Colombia issued a very nasty statement towards the U.S. Then Donald Trump immediately said, okay, we're going to ramp up your tariffs to 25%, then 50% if you don't start taking them now. We're shutting down the U.S. embassy in Colombia. We're going to just a package of things that he promised would happen. 30 minutes later, the president of Colombia says, we'll take them. Not only that, I'll fly my plane up there, the presidential plane, and we'll bring them back on the presidential plane of Colombia. So interesting to see that difference happen. Whether you like Trump or hate Trump or somewhere in between, or find his rhetoric disconcerting or problematic, I consider much of it to be so. This is actual use of our power as the only superpower in the world right now. There are other up and comers, but this is using that power. Whether you agree or disagree, this is the Trump effect. And as this picture was released by Donald Trump of him looking like a gangster after this all happened. This all happened in such a short amount of time. So we're seeing this payoff or pay out even as things go on. However, there is a downside to the exercise of this pressure on South America, and that is that China's going to have an opportunity. They're going to be able to go into South America and say, look, the Americans are unreliable. Beijing is so very reliable. We always keep our promises. We always are nice and steady, and there's no back and forth on any of this. We're good to go. We are the right partner for you. And so there could be some of that happening in the near future, especially if this continues as it is. So that's my thoughts on the Trump effect. Let's go ahead and move on to the next item of irregular warfare. Well, actually, no, let's back off from that for just a moment. There we go. Irregular warfare. There we go. Another undersea cable was damaged in the Baltic Sea. This is a submarine optical fiber cable, the property of the Latvia State Radio and Television Center. They started noticing that there was a series of errors on the line, and it continued and got worse until, as I understand it, it failed outright. Two vessels were in the area at the time. They've already checked one of them that was showing no issues with its anchor and therefore was not a likely one. However, they have taken a ship into custody. And we believe, as I understand, this is the MV of Vezan, which made some unusual maneuvers around the time that things started going awry. The Vezan is the most likely suspect and is being escorted to Sweden by the Coast Guard equivalent over there. Overall, we're looking at another round of this type of pressure tactic that is doing deliberate damage to NATO infrastructure. If you don't believe that Russia is at war with NATO, then you aren't paying attention. Russia is at war with NATO. They're doing it by irregular means. They're doing it by destabilizing and prevent and destabilizing countries, driving wedges, and doing this type of damage to infrastructure. So let's see. That's more of this. Just kind of give you some more context. The Swedes have seized the ship, the Vezan. They Oh, and this was kind of related. You remember a few weeks ago they had the damage on another undersea cable. They found the anchor from that ship, so they're going to have all the evidence they need for that one as well. So a lot of things are coming to a head here. We're seeing everything happening one after another. Now, in that same vein, speaking of destabilizing the area, the citizens of some countries are starting to rise up. Across Europe, people under the rule of pro-Russian vassal regimes are standing up to the ruling class. Bratislava, Tbilisi, and to a certain extent even Belgrade show some impressive movements in the streets. It shows that despite the rise of authoritarianism, people are not staying silent. And I actually had a conversation with some people I know in Serbia that confirmed that the protests are happening there. In this case, they have intensified to across 138 municipalities. They reported that that these were peaceful protests and calls for Serbian President Vucic, I believe it is, to step down and get out of power. They've even approached the public broadcaster in the country and have been greeted by the staff of the station. So things are heating up in Serbia. This is, and even though this is all going on, Vucic is still stating, "I will not impose sanctions on Russia or other friends," meaning that he is trying to get closer to Russia, not to the European Union, to which the country belongs. Moving over to Slovakia, Robert Fico has claimed that the protests happening in his country, which have been getting even more massive, are 1/3 Ukrainians. That they're fomenting these rebellions, and I'm trying to figure out how in the world he's got that many Ukrainians that are able to do so in his mind. However, he's now lost his majority in his coalition government. They've lost four of the ministers of parliament, who have managed to drop his coalition below the 76 seat majority. There's a potential for a no confidence vote and snap elections possibly happening that could finally eliminate, or sorry, not eliminate, remove Fico from power. As Pico, I'm not going to try the pronunciation today. The people have spoken. They want the Kremlin crony Fico out. However, even with all this going on, you can see protests happening. He continues to make statements about Ukraine. He said that Ukraine will never join NATO and EU membership even is in question, and that Ukraine will lose 1/3 of its territory and be occupied by foreign troops. He's reading right off the old script from the Kremlin, and it's continuing to get more obvious every time he does so. All right, next stop here is, oops, not that, is Ukraine itself. And I don't only have a few items here. One of the most interesting was apparently Russians gave unfettered access to military secrets to thousands of North Korean soldiers, including minefield maps, electronic warfare specs, and technical manuals without classified markings. And Ukraine has picked up that data. So there we go. That's Russian classified information getting leaked straight to Ukraine because they didn't bother to properly control it. Why would you need to give this information in this level to thousands of North Korean soldiers? They don't need that level of information to be a meat wave. They did capture, I think I've mentioned this before, but just in case I haven't, they did capture a couple of North Korean soldiers. It turns out it's really hard to capture North Korean soldiers in Ukraine or in Kursk because they tend to remove themselves from the gene pool when they're about to be captured. And a lot of Russians have been doing the same thing. Still, there have been many soldiers captured, including these two North Koreans. On the other hand, Russia carried out an airstrike on Berislav Kherson region with 6 guided bombs hitting a hospital. Nobody killed, but there were some injuries. This is the continuing methods that Russia continues to use. Ukraine is looking at not reducing the conscription age, but introducing a contract for younger men between 18 and 25 to voluntarily contract with the military. This could come soon, but we're seeing those reports now. And this makes me laugh. It really does. This is a German supplied Bürger Panzer II armored engineering vehicle covered in Russian style Contact 1 ERA or explosive reactive armor bricks. Everything that Ukraine gets their hands on, they cover in these bricks because it's better than the base level protection to have that extra on there. So we're seeing these continue and just more adaptation by Ukraine to these vehicles. Let's go ahead and move over to Russia, and I've got a lot to burn through real quick here. Now, this is from 1999. It's Vladimir Putin standing over a bombed building and saying, no sane person would blow up a building with innocents inside. Now, understand that this building was bombed. It was likely bombed, he claims, by Chechen separatists. However, it's more likely from the other evidence that's come out that it was done by the Russians themselves, their FSB. I've seen quite a bit on that. I'm stating that because I don't have the evidence in front of me, and I'm going to state it as my opinion that is the case. So, but I find it to be rather more likely than the alternative that Russia's trying to put out. Of course, you can look at what they're doing today, like bombing hospitals in Ukraine, where there are innocents inside. No sane person would blow up a building with innocents inside. I mentioned this in the previous live stream. This is the evidence of it right here, or at least the article on it. Chinese businesses have started buying out distressed assets from Russian entrepreneurs. They, in this case, are talking about LLC and Skya Mine in Russia's Kemerovo region, which was on the verge of bankruptcy until a Chinese company decided to buy them out. So they've already found who they're going to sell the coal to, and so it's all done. Clearly, this was a planned and prepared business takeover, and Russia's going to find that pretty soon they're going to be speaking more Chinese than they are Russian. There was a lot of drone attacks across many parts of the western part of Russia. They even got to Tatarstan and various other places, in this case, the Kalenkino oil pumping station. A lot of these drone attacks, and I'm not going to go through them all, have been oil infrastructure because that's how Russia pays for the war. In that same vein, Moscow is financing the war with soft loans from banks with expenditures for the war twice what they're reflecting in the budget. So these soft loans in the banks are not from the banks are not being backed up by anything, just basically money pulled out of the Russian financial system and used to finance the war. It's literally strip mining the Russian economy. And I thought this was interesting just because it shows a little creativity on the part of the Russians. This is a Ukrainian mine that the Russians basically lowered a piece of metal on a rope from a drone to cause the mine to explode. Hey, I'll give props where props are due, and that's a creative use of both a mine and a piece of metal on a rope. Good job. Now I wish they'd blown up something more important than a piece of metal on a rope, but still. This video that's been appearing on Russian channels is showing some soldiers going to the assault. And if you look very carefully, you will see that some of them are wearing handcuffs. There's handcuffs there. I believe there's a set there, and they're working on removing it. There's a set right here. You'll see in a moment that it's going to rotate. Well, I'm out of sync here. There's these two are handcuffed together here. So that's the quality of soldiers that the Russians are placing into the military. They've got to be handcuffed and hauled to the front lines to do the assaults. In that same vein, I've seen more and more of these videos of Russian men on crutches or injured going forward in assaults. This is crazy. This is the type of thing you'd have seen in Germany in 1945, not a modern military winning a war. Seriously. Another attack on the Ryazan oil depot happened, I believe it was just last night. So this one's getting hit repeatedly, man. They're slamming it with drones basically every week or so. Then there's this one from Anton Herashchenko sharing this Russian oil refinery bingo card, showing all of the refineries that have been hit so far and all the ones yet to be hit. As he said, I really like this picture, he said. How about you? By the way, there was a similar bingo with ships of the Russian Black Sea Fleet not long ago. Now, the Russian propagandists are getting really hot under the collar because they're seeing possibly Trump not going their way. They're seeing huge losses in Ukraine on the part of their soldiers. It's getting tough for them out there. And so we've got Solovyev stating all European and American reasoning is based on the basic model of Russia will not use nuclear weapons. That's why I'm sure we will see the use of nuclear weapons. Their rhetoric, by and large, makes it an almost inevitable scenario. They're preparing their people just in case. Just stating. More drone strikes in the Tver region. This happened earlier today with explosions. No report on what the damage is. We're just seeing this constantly. There was also a strike on the Russian drone storage sites in the Oriol region with the destruction of 200 Shahed drones that are no longer going to be able to threaten Ukraine. My understanding is it actually hit like the armaments that were supposed to be used on those drones. In this case, thermobaric warheads. Lots of secondary detonations, lots of fireworks. Pretty, very pretty. And kind of just a little flip out of the war for a second here, but I'm going to mention it from a slightly different perspective. Chinese electric cars that have been coming to the Russian market are showing some serious safety issues. Let's see, I think that's muted. Yes, good. The back of the chair is collapsing in an accident, causing spinal injuries to the drivers. And it's lethal stuff there. They've only had a few hundred of these cars show up in Russia. But this is where they're at. They're having to buy Chinese vehicles because they're hardly making their own vehicles anymore. In the realm of sanctions against Russia, Russian oil tankers are now scrambling to find new flags to fly on their freighters because they're getting delisted by the top tier listing countries. Barbados is delisting 46 ships, 14 of them hit by U.S. sanctions. Panama cutting ties with 68 vessels. Barbados was a good, reputable choice. But now they won't be able to use those flags because Russia's basically being sanctioned by the US, preventing them from doing so. This gave them a veneer of legitimacy for their shadow fleet that they no longer get by being able to use those flags. They're getting to the, shall we say, third tier flags about now, like Tanzania and Sao Tome. So interesting to see it happening. Mortgage volumes. Now, I'm not an economist myself, but I have been tracking this enough to know that there's some serious problems with the Russian economy. Now, I'm not going to claim they're going to collapse next week. That's not I don't do that speculation. That's outside of my knowledge base. But mortgage volumes in Russia have fallen by 70% over the last year. That indicates to me at least, a housing market or a mortgage market that is collapsing in on itself. People aren't able to afford to buy those at the interest rates are getting. So therefore, things are going to stay on the market. The value is going to have to drop. The mortgage and the real estate market is going to collapse, at least at this rate. And in an item that is probably just a successful electronic warfare intercept, a Ukrainian naval drone crashed into a private dock of the Neptune Daka cooperative in the Yuzhnaya Spit in Lake Donoslav. It exploded on the dock and destroyed that dock and burned the windows and doors of the docks were blown out. But the Russian soldiers are sealing off the area, which makes me wonder if there was something military going on at that dock after all. Don't know. I can't state one way or the other, but seems unusual for a naval drone to be electronic warfare, taken by electronic warfare and then crash into a dock in a very unusual place. So interesting. Al states everything has momentum, even things that are collapsing. It's going to take time for things to really wind down. Yeah, if there's one thing that is absolutely true, bureaucracy has momentum all its own. And that's what we are seeing in a lot of cases taking place is the equivalent in the Russian mortgage market, the Russian economy. It's big enough that it's not going to immediately just nosedive, but a lot more to be done there. Okay, this one I want to play for you, so let me go ahead and unmute that and hit the play button here. Start it over from the beginning.
I spent many years studying German history. I speak German, I know the country well. And I say to my German friends, including you, Wolfgang, if you want to confirm the worst possible impressions that Americans, not just MAGA Americans, but Americans have of Europe and particularly of Germany, go suggest Chinese troops in Ukraine. Because that is the single worst idea I've heard at Davos in 10 years. It's really important that Germans understand Zeitenwende has to mean something concrete. It can't mean, oh, Europe's security is everybody's problem but ours. Because German troops couldn't possibly do anything useful without Americans to hold their hands. God damn it. This is pathetic. This is truly pathetic. So Friedrich Merz, I look forward to reading your wife's book. I hope that he understands that his role is to make Zeitenwende mean something. And what it has to mean is that Germans step up and take responsibility for peace in Europe. God knows they caused enough war in the past. But when will they take responsibility for peace in Europe? That's my question, not only to you and to Friedrich Merz, but to all Germans, all the Germans here. What the hell do you think you're doing in 2025, passing the buck to the Chinese? I spent many years.
I think that pretty well speaks for itself. And I'm going to let that stand just like that. Let's go ahead and move on. From the Institute for the Study of War, their latest offensive campaign assessment touches on two international things going on. One of the things that I mentioned before was that the Russians cut off the gas supply to Transnistria, and the Moldovans offered to help the Transnistrians. to buy gas from Europe. And they said, no, we don't want to pay money for gas. I mean, we've been getting it basically free from Russia. So clearly we don't want to buy gas. Oh, my heavens. No, no, we're definitely waiting for Russia on this one. So they came up with another solution here with the assistance of Ukraine. And Ukraine stated, hey, you know what? We'll provide you coal. We'll provide you lots and lots of coal, but the deal is that you send us the excess power that's being generated by using our coal. And they've been like, oh, no, 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 this isn't happening at all either. So Transnistria is being offered very valid solutions, that they could be using to power and help their people, but they have quite thoroughly decided that they would rather die on this hill, perhaps literally. And the Kremlin is starting to work on Iraq. After the all the things that are going on in that area, they've started basically reaching out to Iraq to try and establish some relationships there. I don't know how it's going. They say it's going well, and Iraq is expressing interest. It's interesting to watch, though. I wonder how long that's going to continue in. Then there's some things going on in the U.S. regarding this. Trump's National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, has sent dozens of National Security Council staffers responsible for Ukraine, Iran, and North Korea home, suspending them from their jobs. In fact, they were suspended so quick that some of the people couldn't leave the building because their passes stopped working, their badges stopped working. Now, this is interesting. I think it's probably cleaning house, is a good way to put it. And that those staffers are the ones that have basically been part of the Biden administration's slow walking of aid to Ukraine and their escalation management. Therefore, this is walking them out the door and getting them off the property. I already talked about this, didn't I? I think I did. I think I did it under Trump effect, in fact, yes. So I can move that on from that. Now, let's move over to Syria for just a moment. The Syrian government did not authorize the Russians to dock any of their ships in the port of Tartus for quite some time. And when they finally did, the first thing the Syrians did is they went on board and they took all of the Russians' trucks and then distributed them to their own military. And now Russia is now reloading those ships with the Russian equipment that they are taking out of Syria. But it's taken a while to finally get that to get done. In the meantime, the Syrians got a bunch of relatively new trucks, and they're happy as clams about that particular bit. The Russians appear to still be pulling themselves out with their air defense systems and their equipment and all the other material and troops that they had in Syria. Moving entirely away from the Ukraine war for just a moment is this bit of information. The Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy is building a bunch of the equivalents of the World War II D-Day Mulberry harbors. Basically, these landing dock ships that they'll be able to put in place on a beach or on the leading to a beach, so they can quickly unload and start the invasion of Taiwan. And the question is going to be when. This indicates, especially since they're so visually obvious, that the Chinese are serious about taking Taiwan now. And with all the chip manufacturing there, there's a huge economic pain point about to happen if the Chinese actually manage to pull that off. Understand that even if the Americans stop the Chinese, or at least get directly involved in the Taiwanese fight for themselves, and other resources are coming to bear, that will absolutely disrupt major chip manufacturing across the world, causing knock-on effects throughout the global economy, because chips won't be able to leave Taiwan because China will be blockading it. And we will have to fight to get in there and fight to prevent the Chinese from destroying or taking those facilities. And a little bit closer to home, and this is from about 16 days ago, A Wagner mercenary from Russia was arrested crossing the southern border from Mexico to the U.S. by the Border Patrol. He was carrying 2 passports, $4,000 in cash, and a drone. Crazy stuff there. Now, why would a Wagner mercenary be traveling over the Mexican border? I can't imagine it's for good reasons. This is from back on just December 12th, where he was participated in a Kremlin ceremony honoring his work. Just 3 weeks before he was caught, it's pretty clear, at least to Igor Sushko here, that this man was likely here on a sabotage mission. Drone kind of indicates that if not sabotage, at least a surveillance mission of some type. But this is what we're concerned about on the southern border. I'm only going to briefly touch on this. You'll note that I mentioned the deportation flights from Colombia. We've got a lot more going on to Mexico and a bunch of other countries as well. There's a lot of stuff going on with that. I don't have enough time in this live stream to go through it all. But if this is what's getting across our border, this is what we're catching. How many more Wagner mercenaries are already here? That's what I want to know. Over in Belarus, Lukashenko won the election at 87.6% of the votes, and he was complaining that he was already tired of being president, but if he loses power, he's going to lose his head. In that same vein, Steve Rosenberg from the BBC asked Lukashenko, how can you call this a democratic election when your main rivals are in prison or exile? Clearly, lots of oppression going on in Belarus, but free and fair elections, am I right? In that same vein, Lukashenko showed up and did his own voting while his dog peed on the wall. So isn't that just lovely respect for the whole process? Now from Anton Hershchenko, he's quoting General Robert Brieger and saying that if a UN peacekeeping mission in the higher 5-figure range, that would be up to 100,000 effectively, could potentially enforce a ceasefire in Ukraine. That could also involve troops from the global south and the Caucasus alongside the Europeans, but basically saying they better be armed and ready to enforce this mandate. Thing is that just shy of 100,000 troops enforcing it is going to be a tough sell. Mainly because they're already running hundreds of thousands of men on both sides of this war. So what's 100,000 men going to do to actually enforce a ceasefire? It's my thought. From the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Belgium, Putin needs to be weakened and Ukraine needs to be strengthened. The Russian economy has been weakened significantly, but the Russian economy can sustain the war at least for another year. So we have to sustain sanctions. Now, one of the things that Russia's begging for is the end of sanctions. That's because if the sanctions continue, their economy is going to continue to tailspin. Let's see, I already talked about that earlier. Viktor Orban has been threatening to block European sanctions against Russia. As Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland, states, if Viktor Orban really blocks European sanctions at a key moment for the war, it'll be absolutely clear that in this big game for the security and future of Europe, he is playing on Putin's team, not on ours, with all the consequences of this fact. Of course, we can point out that what would the consequences of that be? Footage of a train carrying North Korean M1978 Koksun 170mm self-propelled howitzers. North Korea is sending more and more equipment and artillery and ammunition and possibly more troops. They're working hard to supply Russia. Now, on the one hand, this is bad news for Ukraine. It's good news for South Korea because North Korea is burning their own stockpiles to help Russia do this. This is so complicated. It really is. Now, there was rumors that the U.S. had ordered a 90-day halt of aid to Ukraine. This is actually the halt was for all foreign funding for 90 days to be audited. However, Ukraine's military funding was not affected. That said, the USAID, or U.S. Agency for International Development Aid, is suspended, but that was for school reconstruction, medical aid, and energy repairs for 90 days for an audit. That's the lesser part of the aid that they receive from the U.S. But the suspension does not apply to the military support for Ukraine. This is just not part of the things that are going to be paused. On the kind of moving back to South Korea for just a moment, I mentioned a few weeks ago that the South Korean president tried to declare martial law. It did not go well, and it did not go over well. He's finally been charged with rebellion. So that's one more complication in the Koreas. And finally, from the international area here, Russia and Iran have finally signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement. Basically, they're making closer ties. This is, well, it's about the only way Russia's able to find friends anymore. Just saying. All right, I'm going to be going into the front lines in just a moment here, but before I do, I absolutely pipe in there with questions or comments. I am watching for them. I'd absolutely appreciate you guys doing this. I do tend to burn through the news as quick as I can in some ways, but more important is that I want to let you guys know that I appreciate you being here. It makes a big difference to me. It's been hard to get enough time to get in here and get these live streams done, but I am determined to get them done and to keep passing on the news as best as I can find out of what's going on in Ukraine and around the world at this point in time. Obviously, there's a lot of things that interconnect in the world and in the news, and I want to talk about it. And I hope you guys appreciate it and enjoy it, and that it's an important part of your learning what's going on. So yeah, pipe in, give me some questions or make some comments. Absolutely appreciate it, every single one of them. All right, moving over to the front lines, I got a couple of items from various places. This little bit here is interesting. I'm going to go ahead and play the video for you here.
So we just left Pokrovsk, slightly different to what we imagined we were going into. Hardly any casualties for the 24 hours we were there. Outgoing artillery, incoming artillery, new defence positions up from the east side of Pokrovsk, coming in from the north of Pokrovsk. New positions, new defence positions. Nobody's running around really flapping, but while we were there, there's parts of Pokrovsk have been quarantined. All the civilians have been moved, which I can only assume it's now the forefront of activity. The farmhouse, the house on the hill, the main objective. But yeah, they're coming in from the south, so a bit surprised when it's Swampy. Swampy looks like compo from last of the summer wine. But with civvies now, so
to my pint of bitter at the end of it.
yeah, need a stiff lager. X-Fill's success so far. So we're just following an ambulance out.
I thought you'd like to see that direct report on what was going on near Pokrovsk rather than just having me talk about the lines real quick. And I found this interesting. It does indicate that things in Pokrovsk are still challenging in many ways and that the Russians are continuing to make progress. But they are failing to flank Pokrovsk while sustaining around 1,500 to 2,000 casualties per day all along the front line. There's a lot more foot assaults now because there's not enough vehicles for them. This is a lot of interesting information. On the other hand, Velika Novosilka has been, they basically, the Ukrainians have retreated from it. Apparently a successful maneuver. A lot of fighting retreats from what I understand, but they did finally pull their men out of that encirclement there. That's actually good tactics on the part of the Russians. If the Ukrainians pull out voluntarily, they don't have to fight so hard for that position. That said, the Russians would have probably preferred to encircle the Ukrainians there and destroy those troops because now they're going to be elsewhere that they'll need to deal with later. Let's go and move up to Kursk for just a moment here. Korenivo has never been captured by Ukraine's defense forces, But the Russians are continuing to bomb it and fight near the area, so they're starting to look a lot more like the true embodiment of the Russian world, Ruski Mir. And on this one, I thought it was just kind of interesting. Let me see what you're seeing there. Let's see. Let's bring this down. The new governor of Kursk did a public meeting here and said that I am here in front of you. Stop it with the insults. And if you watch here and read towards the end of this, uh, the first thing the first person he calls on says is pretty hilarious. You're not for the people. Stop the fairy tales. Then he sits back down, and this guy apparently went off on him and after this point. I mean, just absolutely went ballistic over this. So that's the Russian Kursk leadership there. Interesting to see that it's a little bit tough for them. Al, thank you very much. When it comes to Ukraine and the news, you're my Walter Cronkite, so I appreciate your time to show all these things. Absolutely, Al. I'm glad. That is a huge compliment. I don't know that I agree with that compliment, but I do appreciate it, so thank you very much. And we got more on the front lines. We'll start with the map here on this part here. There's not been much change in the Kursk area in quite some time. A little bit. Let me see how far I have to go back before we see a change. Just a little change right there south of Sudza, and it was 8 days ago. So Kursk has pretty much ended up being pretty much stable for the last little while. No changes near Vovchansk or the Kharkiv area here. There was a pretty big change if we get kind of pulled in here about that same time frame. There we go. About 6 days ago. Oh, sorry, 4 days ago, near Tabaevka. And you can see the Russians took a fairly significant chunk there. Nothing big. Oh, there is also a piece over here near Dvorichna. Zapadne, right there. So the Russians are continuing to move in those areas. A lot of crazy things going on, but not really big changes. Just more territory being captured, little bits here and there. What's interesting, though, is that these are areas that were relatively quiet for quite some time. So my feel is that the Russians keep trying to push, like they're pushing different areas to try and force Ukraine to split up their troops and move around. So interesting. There's also a little bit near Makivka. You can see the Russians appear to have captured the whole village at this point. No changes near Chasov Yar in quite some time, but Toretsk continues to be a place of significant fighting. Let's go ahead and move forward here. You can see that the Russians are making some little bits of progress, but Toretsk continues to be an area of intense battles. The Russians are not taking it as easily as they'd hoped to. And that's kind of the front lines right there. I already mentioned Velika Novosilka from several days ago. Everything down here in Zaporizhia has gotten quiet again. Plenty of bombing, don't get me wrong, and a lot of that type of thing. But the actual fighting has gotten a lot less robust, for lack of a better way to say it. It's just little bits of the front line activate for just short little periods, and then it goes back to being quiet unless the Russians are making significant progress for a while. It's pretty intense what's going on. For comparison, here's Wargonzo. That's the Russian source that I check every once in a while to see what things are looking like. Zaporizhia, just positional fighting. Donetsk front, the Russians continue to advance into Velika Novosilka, mentioned that already, with the Ukrainians resisting, but have already left the village and the settlement. The Russians continue to move west from Kharhovo, and there's progress in the Chnoya area, and the Ukrainians are withdrawing their forces. Kind of a general area. Donetsk is kind of their spot at the moment. Chasov Yar, they're saying they're gradually advancing within the city limits, but I've not seen that show up on the maps. This may be wishful thinking. And Kursk, no significant changes in the lines of control. There were quite a few videos and imagery of the Ukrainians repelling attacks. In this case, in the Kupiansk direction, a lot of lost equipment and Russians. A large group of Russian infantrymen were captured in the Volchansk direction, which indicates they're still there, and the Ukrainians are making the most of it. A National Guard unit repelled a Russian attack with 4 vehicles damaged or destroyed and 10 to 20 Russian soldiers eliminated. Over in Toretsk, which I mentioned earlier as being kind of a pretty active spot right now, a tank, a Bradley, and an MRAP busted through to a street in Toretsk and engaged Russian infantry, capturing 4 prisoners. My guess is that it was a raid, not a permanent change, but could be interesting to see if this turns up more in the next few days. As Knoll report states, the battle for Toretsk still hasn't been concluded as Russia faces issues to take control of the remaining places under Ukrainian control. The Russians are advancing inside Krymsky, but it is stalled north of Toretsk. Over near Kurahova, Russia has been geolocated inside Shevchenko and moving towards Andriivka. And this is just minor gains because they believe some of this was actually from previous information that was just being confirmed. Same thing with the Luhansk direction, the direction of Lyman Borova. They did make significant gains, with a couple of those towns already being under Russian control for a while, but now confirmed as they've entered 2 farther forward villages. So that's the kind of the front lines there. And from the Defense Intelligence Update from the UK, as of mid-January 2025, Democratic People's Republic of Korea forces had highly likely sustained around 4,000 casualties in offensive combat operations against Ukrainian forces in Kursk Oblast. Now, that's more than a third of the approximately 11,000 DPRK troops. That's pretty high losses in such a short amount of time. The question is going to be, is North Korea going to send more troops? There's also a lot of issues with the quality of the troops. They're actually kind of better as far as discipline goes than the Russian troops, but they've only managed to achieve tactical gains trying to get in the middle of it. And that's the front lines right there. That's the long story short of this whole situation. I've got a couple of short little videos here that I want to share with you, but let's just take a quick look here. This is a Ukrainian shotgun-armed drone intercepting Russian bomber drones. This is the first firearm-armed FPV drone that really kind of makes sense. They're shrapnel charges. They don't have a huge recoil. This is what I was expecting to see happen, is drone-on-drone armed combat, not just the ram a drone into a drone. So interesting to see this taking place. It's just fascinating, the changes in drone warfare that we're seeing on the fly. And finally, we'll end off with a super cute cat, a furry artilleryman. I always find it fascinating how cats and other animals are welcome in Ukrainian positions. In this case, the cat's exploring the artillery piece, but unmolested. It's not being attacked by any of the Ukrainians. And this is what always the care that the Ukrainians have for the animals really shows a lot about their true heart. And on that note, that's everything I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate you guys being here. It makes a big difference to me, and it helps me to see that there is continuing interest in what's going on in Ukraine. This is important stuff. We're seeing the world redrawing itself before our very eyes. I was in high school at the fall of the Soviet Union, and before my eyes, everything I learned in geography rapidly became unimportant as the lines were redrawn in Eastern Europe. We are seeing likely similar happening now. And you might find that what's true in your high school geography class just last week may not be true today. It's a fascinating time to live in. Paul, Al, thank you very much. Always glad to do the stream. And Paul, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And on that note, thank you guys. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next live stream.